November 1942. Germany was winning the war, not with tanks or bombs or soldiers, with mathematics. Admiral Karl Dönitz sat in his office at U-boat headquarters in Paris and looked at the numbers his staff had just given him. In the past 30 days, German submarines had sunk 118 Allied merchant ships. That was 729,000 tons of shipping sent to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Food that would never reach Britain. Fuel that would never power British tanks. Ammunition that would never fire from British guns. Steel that would never build British planes. All of it sitting in the dark water, 2,000 feet down, feeding the fish. Dönitz picked up a second report. This one showed Allied shipbuilding capacity. Britain could build approximately 120,000 tons of new merchant shipping per month. Maybe 130,000 if they worked every shipyard at maximum capacity and nothing broke down. The Americans were building another 90,000 tons per month, though that number was supposedly increasing. Dönitz did the subtraction in his head. The Allies were losing 729,000 tons per month and replacing 210,000 tons. The gap was 519,000 tons. Every month, the Allied merchant fleet shrank by 500,000 tons. Britain needed 26 million tons of shipping to survive. They currently had 19 million tons and dropping. Dönitz calculated they had 8 months left, maybe 9. Then Britain would starve. The war would end. Germany would win. He smiled. It was the smile of a man watching an enemy drown slowly and knowing there was nothing that enemy could do about it. Mathematics did not lie. Mathematics did not care about courage or determination or willpower. You could not sink 700,000 tons of shipping per month and replace 200,000 tons per month and survive. It was impossible. The numbers said so. What Dönitz did not know was that 5,000 miles away in California, those numbers were about to become completely irrelevant. September 27th, 1942, 2 months earlier, South Atlantic Ocean, 400 miles off the coast of Brazil. The Liberty ship SS Stephen Hopkins was sailing alone through morning fog when lookouts spotted 2 vessels emerging from the mist. Captain Paul Buck raised his binoculars and felt his blood turn to ice water. German raiders. The first was Stier, an auxiliary cruiser carrying 6 5.9-inch naval guns. The second was Tannenfels, an armed supply ship. Together, they mounted more firepower than a destroyer. Buck looked at his own ship. The Hopkins carried 1 4-inch gun on the stern. 1 gun against 8. The Hopkins was a merchant ship built to haul cargo, not fight battles. She had been constructed in 58 days at a shipyard in California by workers who 3 months earlier had been farmers and store clerks and housewives. The gun crew consisted of 15 Navy Armed Guard sailors, most of them teenagers who had trained for 6 weeks. This was not a fight. This was an execution. The German ship signaled, "Stop your engines. Prepare to be boarded. Standard procedure." Merchant ships did not fight warships. They surrendered. The crew became prisoners of war. The cargo went to the bottom. That was how it worked. That was how it always worked. Buck did not stop his engines. He gave a different order. General quarters. Man the gun. We fight. His officers looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Sir, we cannot win this. We have 1 gun against 8. Buck knew that. He also knew what was in his cargo holds. 7,000 tons of ammunition and supplies bound for Allied forces in South Africa. Soldiers fighting Rommel in the desert. If those supplies did not arrive, men would die. Good men, American men, British men, men who were counting on this cargo to keep them alive. "I am not asking you to win," Buck said. "I am asking you to make them pay for it." The Hopkins came about turning to bring the stern gun to bear. 19-year-old engine cadet Edwin O'Hara climbed into position behind the 4-inch gun. He had fired this weapon 37 times during training, never at a target that was shooting back. His hands were shaking. The other gunners took their positions. Nobody spoke. Steyer opened fire at 8:52 in the morning. The first salvo screamed overhead and exploded in the water 200 yards beyond the Hopkins. The Germans were ranging in. The second salvo hit closer. Spray from the explosions washed across the Hopkins deck. O'Hara pulled the firing lanyard. The gun roared. The shell arced toward Steer and missed by 400 yards. He adjusted and fired again. Miss. Again. Miss. A German shell hit the Hopkins below the waterline near the bow. The explosion tore a hole 6 feet across. Seawater poured in. The bow started sinking lower. Another shell hit the engine room. The boiler erupted. Steam filled the compartment. 2 men died instantly. The ship's speed dropped from 11 knots to 6 knots. O'Hara kept firing. His 6th shot hit Steer's bridge. The explosion killed 2 German officers and wounded the captain. For 90 seconds, the German return fire stopped. O'Hara reloaded and fired again. This time the shell punched through Steer's hull above the waterline. Fuel lines ruptured. Black smoke poured from the German ship. But the Hopkins was dying. Cargo hold number 2 was on fire. The ammunition inside was cooking off in secondary explosions. Flames shot 100 feet into the air. The crew tried to fight the fire, but the heat was melting metal. Another German shell hit the forward deck and killed 3 men. Captain Buck collapsed on the bridge. A shell fragment had caught him in the chest. His second officer knelt beside him. "Sir, we need to abandon ship." Buck shook his head. "Not yet. Did we hit them?" "Yes, sir. Steyer is burning. Then keep firing." O'Hara's 10th shot hit Steyer's forward gun mount and disabled it. His 11th shot penetrated the engine room. The German ship stopped dead in the water. His 12th shot hit the ammunition magazine. The explosion that followed broke Steer's back. The German raider split in 2 and sank in 4 minutes. The Hopkins followed her down 10 minutes later. 15 men survived, crammed into 1 lifeboat. They drifted for 31 days. Captain Buck died from his wounds 6 days after rescue. His last words were, "Did Steyer go down?" When they told him yes, he smiled and died. Edwin O'Hara did not make it to the lifeboat. After everyone else abandoned ship, he ran back to the stern gun and found 5 shells left in the ready locker. He fired all 5 at the burning Steyer. All 5 hit. The German ships turned their guns away from the lifeboats and back toward the Hopkins. O'Hara was killed moments later by machine gun fire. He was awarded the Navy Cross posthumously. He was 19 years old. The battle between Stephen Hopkins and Steer was the only time in World War II that an American merchant ship sank a German warship in a gun duel. But what made that victory truly remarkable was not the courage of the crew, though that was extraordinary. What made it remarkable was this. The Stephen Hopkins was a mass-produced Liberty ship built in less than 2 months by workers who had never built ships before. Steyer was a purpose-built raider constructed by master craftsmen over 2 years in a German shipyard. The Liberty ship won. And that single fact terrified the German Navy more than any battle they had lost, because the Hopkins was not special. She was one of hundreds. And by November 1942, those hundreds were about to become thousands. Richmond, California, November 12, 1942. 2 months after the Hopkins went down. Shipyard number 2, owned by industrialist Henry Kaiser. It was 12:01 in the morning, and the night shift was just beginning. 15,000 workers streamed through the gates. Women in welding masks, black men from the South who had never seen the ocean before last month, teenagers, grandfathers, former teachers and farmers and store clerks. Most of them had been working in this shipyard for less than 6 months, some for less than 6 weeks. They were about to attempt something that every traditional shipbuilder in America said was impossible. They were going to build a complete Liberty ship in less than 1 week, from keel to launch, 441 feet long, 7,000 tons, 10,000 separate parts, 500,000 rivets replaced by welded seams. 1 ship, 5 days. In the site office, Kaiser's production manager checked the schedule one more time. Every prefabricated section had been prepared weeks in advance. Bow sections, stern sections, deck sections, engine mounts, all of it ready to go. The supply chain had been mapped down to the minute. Steel plates would arrive at shipway number 1 at exactly 2:15 in the morning. The main engine would be lowered into place at 9:30 on day 3. The propeller shaft would be aligned on day 4. Everything had been planned. Everything had been timed. Everything had been rehearsed. The British were still building Liberty ships in 240 days using traditional methods. Kaiser was about to do it in 5. At 12:01 sharp, the first steel keel plate was laid on shipway number 1. Welding torches lit up the night. Sparks fell like rain. Cranes lifted hull sections that weighed 30 tons and positioned them with precision measured in fractions of an inch. Workers swarmed over the construction site in organized chaos. Every person knew exactly what to do because they had done it before. This was the 247th Liberty ship built at this yard. The workers were not craftsmen. They were specialists. Each person performed one task over and over until they could do it perfectly in their sleep. Margaret Dahlia stood on the scaffold platform beside the hull and adjusted her welding mask. She was 52 years old. 3 months ago, she had been a librarian in Oregon. Her son was serving on a destroyer in the Pacific. Her husband had died 2 years earlier. She had come to Richmond because the recruitment posters said they needed workers, and she needed purpose. Kaiser's training school had taught her to weld in 6 weeks. Now she could lay a bead that would pass X-ray inspection 98 times out of 100. She was better than most men who had been welding for years because she followed the procedure exactly, every time. No shortcuts, no improvisation. She pressed the welding rod to the seam between 2 hull plates and squeezed the trigger. The arc flared. Metal melted and fused. She moved the rod at exactly the right speed, maintaining exactly the right angle, creating a weld that would hold against North Atlantic storms and German torpedoes and anything else the ocean could throw at it. This seam would be part of the hull. If it failed, the ship would sink. If the ship sank, men would die, men like her son, so the seam would not fail. By November 15th at 3:30 in the afternoon, the hull was complete, engines installed and tested, all systems operational. The Liberty ship SS Robert E. Peary slid down the shipway into San Francisco Bay exactly 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after the keel was laid. 15,000 workers stood on the docks and cheered. They had just built a seagoing cargo ship in less than 5 days. They had done something the experts said was impossible. They had proven that American industrial methods could beat European craftsmanship 10 times over. And they had done it using people nobody else wanted: women, black workers, old men, kids barely out of high school, the people traditional shipyards would not hire. Photographs of Robert E. Peary appeared in newspapers across America and around the world. In London, Winston Churchill saw the pictures and thought it was propaganda. Impossible. You cannot build ships that fast. He sent a naval officer to inspect Kaiser's yards personally. The officer's report came back. It is real. The Americans are building Liberty ships in less than 6 days. Churchill read the report twice and then sat in silence for 5 minutes. When he finally spoke, he said only 3 words: "We will win." In Paris, Admiral Donitz received the same intelligence in December 1942. His staff had counted American ship launches for the month of November. 94 Liberty ships. That was 700,000 tons of new shipping in 30 days. More than Germany's U-boats had sunk. For the first time since 1939, the Allies were building ships faster than Germany could sink them. Donitz pulled out his calculations from 2 months earlier. The ones that showed Britain had 8 months to live. He crossed them out. The mathematics had changed. The war had changed. He wrote one line in his diary that night: "The Americans have solved the tonnage problem. The equation no longer works in our favor." But Donitz did not give up. He could not give up. In March 1943, his U-boats sank 108 Allied ships, 627,000 tons, the highest monthly total of the entire war. It was Germany's last desperate surge, one final attempt to sink ships faster than America could build them. While Donitz was sinking 108 ships, America launched 140 Liberty ships, plus 40 tankers, plus 25 Victory ships. The mathematics had become absurd. Germany was losing 2 ships built for every 1 ship sunk, then 3 to 1, then 4 to 1. By December 1943, exactly 1 year after Donitz realized his equation was broken, America had built 1,849 Liberty ships in 12 months. Britain had built 600 merchant ships total, using every shipyard they had. America alone was building more than 3 times what Britain could produce, using workers who had been civilians 18 months earlier. The SS Stephen Hopkins had fought and died in September 1942, when the U-boat war still hung in the balance. Her crew did not know they were fighting with a weapon Germany could never match. Not the 4-inch gun. The shipyard that built her. The workers who had never built ships before, but learned how. The system that could take farmers and teachers and turn them into shipbuilders in 6 weeks. The industrial capacity that could build a ship in 5 days. Germany had U-boats and tactics and experienced crews. America had something better. It had mathematics. And in a war of attrition, mathematics always wins. But Kaiser had one problem nobody anticipated. The workers building these ships, the women and the black workers, and the old men and the teenagers, nobody had ever asked them to do something this important before. Nobody had ever trusted them with this much responsibility. Nobody had ever told them they were essential. And now that they knew what they were capable of, now that they had proven they could do the impossible, they were not going to stop. Not until every last ship was built. Not until every last man came home. Augusta Clausen stood outside the Kaiser Training School in Richmond, California, on a cold morning in December 1942. She was 48 years old, a high school librarian for 23 years, mother of 3 sons, all serving overseas. Her husband had died 2 years earlier. She had never held a welding torch in her life. In front of her, 200 other women waited in line, farm wives with work-worn hands, city girls in nice dresses who looked terrified, black women who had traveled from Alabama and Mississippi because this was the first industrial job they had ever been allowed to apply for, young women whose husbands were fighting in Europe, old women whose sons were fighting in the Pacific, all of them standing in line at 6 in the morning in the cold, waiting to learn how to build ships. The door opened. A man walked out. He was in his 50s, weathered face, hands scarred from decades of metalwork. His name was Frank Morrison, and he had been welding ships since 1912. He looked at the crowd of women, and his expression said everything. "This is a waste of time. Most of you will not make it through the first week," Morrison said. His voice was loud enough to carry across the entire crowd. "Welding is hard. The equipment weighs 40 pounds. The work is dangerous. You will get burned. You will breathe fumes that make you sick. You will work in spaces so tight you cannot move. If you think this is going to be easy, leave now and save us all some time." Nobody moved. Morrison held up a welding rod. "This is what keeps ships from sinking. If your weld is bad, the seam cracks. Water comes in. The ship goes down. Men die." He paused. "Your husband dies. Your son dies. Your brother dies, because you did not learn to weld properly." He looked across the crowd. "Any questions?" Augusta raised her hand. "When do we start?" They started that afternoon. 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, for 6 weeks. The first day, Morrison handed each woman a welding mask and a pair of heavy leather gloves. "Put these on. Now pick up the torch." Half the women could barely lift it. The welding rig weighed 40 pounds, and the torch added another 10. You had to hold it steady while you worked. If your hand shook, the weld would be uneven. If the weld was uneven, it would fail. "Strike your arc," Morrison said. "Touch the rod to the metal and pull back slightly. Maintain a 1/4-inch gap. Move at consistent speed. Keep the angle at 15 degrees. Augusta touched the rod to the metal plate. Nothing happened. "Press the trigger," Morrison said. She pressed the trigger. The arc flared with a light so bright it hurt her eyes, even through the protective mask. The metal began to melt. She moved the rod forward. The puddle of molten metal followed. She was welding. She finished the bead and stepped back. Morrison examined it. "That is terrible," he said. "Do it again." She did it again. Terrible. Again. Terrible. Again. Terrible. By the end of the first day, Augusta's shoulders were screaming from holding the torch. Her hands were blistered inside the gloves. Her arms were covered with tiny burn marks where sparks had landed. She went back to her rented room that night and cried from exhaustion. She came back the next morning. By the end of the first week, half the women had quit. It was too hard, too dangerous, too exhausting. The ones who stayed were not necessarily the youngest or the strongest. They were the ones who had something to prove or someone to bring home. Betty Reed was one of them. She was 34 years old, a black woman from Alabama who had been a school teacher before the war. She had seen the Kaiser recruitment poster in Birmingham. It showed a woman welding with the words, "Good pay, no experience necessary, help win the war." Betty had taken a bus for 3 days to get to California. She was not going back. On the second week, Morrison paired Augusta and Betty together for a training exercise. "Weld this joint, both sides. X-ray quality. You have 2 hours. He walked away. Augusta looked at Betty. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Augusta said, "You take the left side, I will take the right. We meet in the middle." Betty nodded. They worked in silence. The only sound was the hiss and crackle of the welding arcs. Augusta focused on keeping her hand steady, maintaining the right angle, moving at consistent speed. Everything Morrison had drilled into them. When she finished her side, she stepped back and inspected Betty's work. It was perfect, better than perfect. The bead was smooth and even, no slag, no porosity, no defects she could see. "You are better than me," Augusta said. Betty looked at her. "We are both good enough. That is what matters." Morrison examined their work with a magnifying glass. Then he pulled out a chipping hammer and struck the weld hard enough to break a bad one. It held. He struck it again. Still held. He looked at them. That will pass X-ray. You two just became welders. Report to the shipyard, Monday morning, January 18th, 1943. Augusta and Betty walked through the gates of Richmond Shipyard No. 2 on their first day as shipfitter welders. The yard was massive, 880 acres, 4 separate shipyards, 27 slipways, 90,000 workers on 3 shifts. The noise was overwhelming, cranes moving, metal being cut, hammers pounding, welding torches hissing, and above it all, the constant screech of rivet guns, even though Kaiser was moving away from riveting toward welding. Their foreman was a man named Dutch Sorensen. He had been building ships since 1925. He looked at the assignment sheet and then looked at Augusta and Betty, a librarian and a colored school teacher. He shook his head. This is what they are sending me. He pointed to a partially assembled bow section, 40 feet long and 20 feet high. Those hull plates need to be welded. The seams, both sides. You have until end of shift. Try not to kill yourselves. Augusta and Betty climbed onto the scaffold beside the bow section. The hull plates were massive, each one 20 feet long and an inch thick. The seams between them had been tack welded to hold them in position. Their job was to run continuous welds along every seam, fusing the plates into a single solid structure. Augusta struck her arc and began. The work was exactly like training, except harder. The scaffold was unstable. The angle was awkward. The plates were thicker than anything they had practiced on. She worked slowly, carefully, making sure each bead was perfect before moving to the next. By noon, they had completed 4 seams. Sorensen climbed up to inspect. He ran his hand along the welds. Then he pulled out his chipping hammer and struck them hard. They held. He looked at the 2 women. You might actually be worth something. Do not prove me wrong. They did not. By the end of the first week, they were welding faster than men who had been there 6 months. By the end of the first month, they were training new workers, but the work was brutal. 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Welding in spaces so tight they had to squeeze in sideways. Overhead welding, where molten metal dripped on their arms even through protective clothing. The heat was intense. Summer temperatures inside the hull sections reached 120 degrees. The noise never stopped. The fumes made them sick. Augusta's diary entry from March 17, 1943. A crane dropped a hull section today. It landed on 2 men. They were dead before anyone reached them. We kept working because the ship still needed to be built, and stopping would not bring them back. I thought about my sons and welded faster, but there was another battle happening in the shipyard that had nothing to do with building ships. Joseph James arrived at Richmond in February 1943. He was 32 years old, black, from Biloxi, Mississippi. He had worked as a dock laborer for 14 years loading cargo ships. He knew ships. He knew the work. But in Mississippi, black workers could only do manual labor. No skilled positions, no advancement, no hope. The Kaiser recruiter told him California was different. Joseph did not believe it, but the pay was 4 times what he made in Mississippi, and his wife was pregnant with their 3rd child. He took the chance. His first day, the foreman looked at him. You ever operate a crane? Joseph shook his head. The foreman pointed to a tower crane 100 feet tall. Go up there. Henderson will train you. 2 weeks, you will be running it yourself. Joseph climbed the ladder. At the top, he met Bill Henderson, a white man from Oklahoma who had been operating cranes for 20 years. Henderson looked at Joseph and said, I do not care what color you are. I care if you can learn this job. Can you? Yes, sir, Joseph said. Then stop calling me sir and pay attention. 2 weeks later, Joseph was operating a 20-ton crane, lifting hull sections and positioning them with precision measured in inches. He was good at it, better than good. He could set a 40-ton bow section onto the hull within a quarter-inch of the target position. The workers below trusted him because he never dropped a load, never swung wide, never made them run for safety. But not everyone was happy about it. One morning in March, a white worker from Georgia named Wade Cooper refused to work under Joseph's crane. "I am not taking orders from a colored," Cooper said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I do not care what California says. Where I come from, they know their place." The foreman, Dutch Sorensen, walked over. "Cooper, you have two choices. You work under whoever is operating that crane, or you leave, right now." Cooper looked at him. "You are going to fire me over this?" "I am not firing you," Sorensen said. "You are quitting. Because if you stay, you follow the rules. And the rules say the best crane operator runs the crane. I do not care if he is black, white, green, or from Mars. Now choose." Cooper chose to leave. 3 other workers from the south left with him. Sorensen watched them go and then turned to the rest of the crew. "Anyone else have a problem?" Nobody spoke. "Good. Get back to work." That night, Joseph went home to his wife. She asked him how the day went. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "A white man defended me today, in front of other white men, because I was good at my job." She asked what he meant. Joseph said, "For the first time in my life, I was judged by my work, not my skin. You have no idea what that means." By July 1943, Joseph was a lead crane operator supervising 4 cranes. By October, he was training new operators, including 2 white men from Texas who called him sir without being told to. After the war, Joseph stayed in California. He used his skills to get a job at the Port of Oakland. His children grew up in a house he bought with money he earned operating cranes. His grandson became a civil engineer. None of it would have happened if Kaiser had not been desperate enough to hire anyone who could do the work. But the most dramatic moment in the shipyard happened on March 29, 1943, and it had nothing to do with cranes or welding or race relations. A hull section being assembled in Shop 47 developed a crack during stress testing. The crack ran 18 inches along a critical weld seam in the bow section. If the crack could not be repaired, the entire section would have to be scrapped. 3 weeks of work, 40 workers, thousands of dollars, all wasted. Dutch Sorensen examined the crack. The problem was the location. The crack was in an overhead position inside a cramped space between 2 bulkheads. The welder would have to lie on their back, reach up into a gap 14 inches wide, and weld blind because there was no room to see what they were doing, and the weld had to be perfect because this was a structural seam. If it failed at sea, the bow would separate from the hull. The ship would sink. Sorensen called his best welders together. "Who can fix this?" The men looked at the crack and shook their heads. Too tight. Too awkward, cannot see the work, too risky. If the weld fails inspection, the whole section is scrap anyway. Augusta stepped forward. "I can do it." Sorensen looked at her. "You are 48 years old and you have been welding for 2 months. This is expert-level work." "I can do it," Augusta repeated. "If you fail, that entire bow section gets scrapped. 3 weeks of work gone. Then I will not fail." Sorensen stared at her for a long moment. Then he handed her the welding rig. "You have 1 shot. Do not waste it." Augusta climbed into the cramped space between the bulkheads. She could barely fit. The gap was so narrow she had to turn sideways. Once inside, she lay on her back and reached up toward the crack. She could not see it. She had to work by feel, running her gloved hand along the seam until she found the crack. Then she positioned the welding rod by touch alone and struck her arc. The work was agonizing. Her arms screamed from holding the torch above her head. Sparks and molten metal rained down on her face despite the protective mask. The heat was suffocating. She could not see if the weld was good. She could only feel the resistance of the rod, listen to the sound of the arc, trust her training. She worked for 40 minutes without stopping. When she finished, she crawled out of the space covered in burns and metal splatter. Sorensen inspected the weld with a magnifying glass. Then he ordered an X-ray. The X-ray came back an hour later. 0 defects, perfect penetration, better than most welds done in ideal conditions. Sorensen looked at Augusta. "That is the best repair weld I have ever seen." "How did you do it?" "I just did what you taught us," Augusta said. "Consistent angle, consistent speed, consistent arc length, same as always." The bow section went on to become part of the Liberty ship SS John W. Brown. That ship survived the war, carried cargo through German U-boat waters, weathered North Atlantic storms, and served until 1946. The weld Augusta made on March 29, 1943, never failed. Not once, not ever. By December 1943, Richmond shipyards employed 90,000 workers, 28% women, 15% black, 12% over age 60, 8% under age 21. More than half the workforce would not have been hired by traditional shipyards under any circumstances. But they built 1,149 ships in a single year. More ships than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined built during the entire war. The revolution was not just in the ships, it was in who built them. Women who had been librarians and teachers, black workers who had been sharecroppers and laborers, old men who had been told they were too old to contribute, young people who had been told they were too inexperienced. All of them proving that when you give people a chance and train them properly and treat them with respect, they will do things nobody thought possible. Augusta Clausen worked at Richmond shipyards until August 1945. She helped build 47 Liberty ships. After the war, she went back to being a librarian, but she kept her welding certification current for the rest of her life. When asked why, she said, "Because I want to remember that I was trusted with something important, and I did not let anyone down." Joseph James worked at Kaiser until 1946, then took a job at the Port of Oakland as a master crane operator. He worked there until he retired in 1975. His personnel file noted that in 32 years, he never dropped a load, not once. Betty Reed stayed in Richmond after the war and opened a welding school for women and minorities. She taught welding for 40 years. Over 2,000 people learned the trade from her. When she died in 1995, her obituary said she had taught students that skill and determination mattered more than background or color. The ships these workers built did more than carry cargo. They carried proof that America's strength was not in its factories or its resources. It was in its people, all of them. When the country finally gave everyone a chance to contribute, they built 2,710 Liberty ships in 4 years, ships that kept Britain alive, ships that supplied the armies that liberated Europe, ships that won the war. But building the ships was only half the battle. Now those ships had to survive what Germany was throwing at them, because it did not matter how fast you could build a Liberty ship if German U-boats could sink it on its first voyage. And in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, the U-boats were waiting. March 1944, North Atlantic Ocean, 800 miles west of Ireland. The Liberty ship SS Richard Hovey had been at sea for 9 days, carrying 8,000 tons of ammunition and tanks to England as part of convoy HX-280. She had been built in 27 days at Kaiser's Richmond shipyard by workers who 18 months earlier had been teachers and farmers. Now she was about to find out if those welds would hold. At 3:17 in the morning, the sonar operator on the escort destroyer heard it. Torpedo in the water, bearing 270, range 1,200 yards. The destroyer's captain grabbed the radio. All ships, evasive action, hard to starboard now. Captain James Mitchell, on the Hovey's bridge, spun the wheel. The Liberty ship began a slow, agonizing turn. Liberty ships were not built for speed. Maximum velocity was 11 knots. The Torpedo was traveling at 46 knots. The mathematics were not in his favor. The Torpedo missed by 40 yards. It passed down the starboard side close enough that the crew could see the wake. Then it detonated against a freighter 600 yards behind them. The explosion lit up the night. The freighter, a British merchant ship 20 years old, broke in half and sank in 4 minutes. Mitchell did not have time to think about that. The sonar operator on the destroyer was screaming into the radio. Second torpedo, bearing 280, range 800 yards. Mitchell turned the wheel again. The Hovey responded with the grace of a drunken elephant, swinging slowly to port. Too slowly. The Torpedo hit the Hovey amidships on the starboard side, 8 feet below the waterline. The explosion tore a hole 15 feet across in the hull. Seawater poured in at a rate of 200 tons per minute. The ship shuddered from bow to stern. Metal screamed, rivets popped, and then something happened that should not have happened. The ship stayed afloat. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Robert Vance felt the impact throw him against the bulkhead. He pulled himself up and looked at the gauges. The hull breach was in cargo hold number 3, just aft of the engine room. Water was flooding in, but the watertight doors between compartments had held. The engine room was still dry. The engines were still running. Vance grabbed the intercom. "Captain, engine room. We are taking water in hold 3, but the compartment doors are sealed. We still have power. We still have propulsion." On the bridge, Mitchell could not believe what he was hearing. Liberty ships were supposed to be fragile, mass-produced merchant ships built by inexperienced workers using welded seams instead of proper rivets. The experts had said they would crack in heavy seas, break apart under stress, sink at the first torpedo hit. Mitchell looked at the gauges. The Hovey was listing 8 degrees to starboard from the weight of water in hold 3. But she was not sinking. She was not breaking apart. She was still moving at 9 knots. "Damage control, report," Mitchell said into the intercom. Damage Control Officer Thomas Riley was already in hold 3, wading through waist-deep water. The Torpedo had blown a hole big enough to drive a truck through. Water was pouring in like Niagara Falls. But the structural bulkheads around the hole were intact. The welds had held. The force of the explosion had been absorbed by the hull plating, not transferred to the frame. It should have cracked the welds and split the ship open. Instead, the welds had flexed and held. "Captain, hold 3 is flooding but contained," Riley reported. "The watertight bulkheads are holding. We are pumping out water, but it is a losing battle. We cannot stop the flooding, but we can slow it down. We need to get to port, now." Mitchell looked at the convoy commander's last position. They were 800 miles from Ireland. At 9 knots, that was 89 hours, nearly 4 days. He looked at his navigator. "Can we make it?" The navigator did the math. "If the flooding stays contained and we do not take another hit, maybe." Mitchell made his decision. "All hands, we are not abandoning ship. We are going to Ireland. Damage control, keep that water contained. Engine room, give me everything you have. The Hovey limped forward at 9 knots with a 15-foot hole in her side and 2,000 tons of seawater in her belly. For the next 87 hours, the crew fought to keep the Hovey alive. Damage control teams worked in rotating shifts, shoring up bulkheads with timber braces, pumping water, sealing cracks. The engine room crew nursed the engines, keeping them running at maximum sustainable power. The deck crew shifted cargo to compensate for the list, moving tanks and crates from the port side to starboard to balance the weight. On the 3rd day, a storm hit. 20-foot seas, 50-knot winds. The Hovey pitched and rolled like a toy boat in a bathtub. Every wave that hit the damaged hull sent shudders through the entire ship. The crew waited for the welds to crack, for the bulkheads to fail, for the ship to break apart. It did not happen. The welds held. The structure held. The ship kept moving. On the morning of the 4th day, the coast of Ireland appeared on the horizon. The Hovey entered port listing 12 degrees to starboard, riding low in the water, trailing oil, barely making 6 knots. She looked like she should have sunk 3 days ago, but she had not. She had survived a torpedo hit, a North Atlantic storm, and 800 miles of sailing with a hole the size of a garage door in her hull. The British harbor master came aboard and inspected the damage. He walked through hold 3, now half full of seawater, and examined the welds around the torpedo hole. Then he looked at Captain Mitchell. "Who built this ship?" Mitchell told him. "Kaiser Shipyards, Richmond, California, built in 27 days. The harbor master shook his head. 27 days, by amateurs, and she survived this. He ran his hand along one of the welds. "These welds are better than anything we build in Britain. How did they do it?" Mitchell thought about Augusta Clausen and Betty Reed and Joseph James and all the other workers who had built this ship. Workers who had been told they were not good enough, not experienced enough, not skilled enough. Workers who had proven everyone wrong. "They learned," Mitchell said, "and they did not make mistakes." The Hovey was repaired and returned to service. She made 14 more convoy crossings before the war ended. She survived 2 more torpedo attacks, 3 storms severe enough to sink lesser ships, and 200,000 miles of hard sailing. She was finally scrapped in 1962, 18 years after she was built. The welds never failed, not once. But the Hovey was not unique. By mid-1944, dozens of Liberty ships had survived torpedo hits that should have sunk them. The ships were proving tougher than anyone expected. German U-boat commanders were reporting that Liberty ships required multiple torpedo hits to sink, sometimes 3 or 4. That was not supposed to be possible for thin-skinned merchant ships, but it was happening. The reason was in the welds. Traditional riveted ships had a fundamental weakness. When a torpedo hit, the shock wave would travel through the rivets, popping them loose in a chain reaction. The hull would split open like a zipper. But welded seams did not have that weakness. The welds flexed under impact, absorbing energy instead of transferring it. The ships bent, but did not break. Admiral Karl Dönitz read the reports from his U-boat commanders and did not want to believe them. His submarines were expending 3, sometimes 4, torpedoes per merchant ship. That was not sustainable. Each U-boat carried 14 torpedoes. If it took 4 torpedoes to sink a Liberty ship, that was only 3 ships per patrol. The mathematics no longer worked. In May 1944, Dönitz ordered a captured Liberty ship examined by German naval engineers. The ship had been seized in a French port before it could escape. The engineers spent 2 weeks studying the construction. Their report was damning. The American ships are built using prefabricated sections welded together. The welds are of exceptional quality, better than our own shipyards produce. The structural design incorporates redundant bulkheads and compartmentalization that makes the ships extremely resistant to torpedo damage. A single torpedo hit that would sink a German merchant ship will only damage a Liberty ship. The ship will remain afloat and operational. To reliably sink these vessels requires multiple hits, which is tactically and economically unsustainable given our current torpedo production and U-boat numbers. The report concluded with a sentence that summarized Germany's problem perfectly. The Americans have industrialized ship construction to a degree we cannot match. They are building ships faster than we can sink them, and the ships they are building are tougher than the ships we are targeting. We cannot win this battle. But it was not just the ships that were tough, it was the men sailing them. The SS James Iredell was torpedoed in January 1945, 600 miles from England. The torpedo blew off the entire stern section. The ship should have sunk immediately. Instead, the watertight bulkheads held, and the forward two-thirds of the ship remained afloat. The crew rigged a jury sail from cargo tarpaulins and limped toward England at 3 knots. They sailed for 8 days on a ship that had no propeller, no rudder, and no stern. They made it to port. The forward section of the Iredell was welded to a new stern section built in a British shipyard. The ship returned to service and completed 11 more voyages before the war ended. The SS John Burke was hit by a Japanese kamikaze aircraft in the Philippines in December 1944. The plane crashed into the forward hold, which was full of ammunition. The resulting explosion was equivalent to 2,000 tons of TNT. The bow of the ship disintegrated. The blast was visible 30 miles away. Debris landed on ships 2 miles distant. Every man in the forward section of the ship died instantly. But the aft section, protected by the armored bulkhead between Hold 1 and Hold 2, survived intact. The engines kept running. The stern section stayed afloat for 40 minutes, long enough for the surviving crew to abandon ship in an orderly fashion. 73 men survived because a welded bulkhead held against a blast that should have vaporized the entire ship. These stories spread through the merchant marine. Liberty ships earned a reputation. They were ugly. They were slow. They rolled like pigs in heavy seas. But they were tough. Sailors trusted them because the ships brought them home even when they should have sunk. Back in Richmond, California, the workers building the ships started hearing the stories. Augusta Clawson's son, serving on a destroyer escort, wrote to her in July 1944. "Mom, we escorted a convoy last month. One of the Liberty ships took a torpedo amidship. We thought she was gone, but she kept going. Made it to port with a hole you could sail a boat through. The crew told us she was built at Richmond. They said whoever welded that ship saved their lives. I do not know if you worked on that particular ship, but if you did, thank you. You brought 42 men home." Augusta kept that letter for the rest of her life. By the end of 1944, the mathematics had completely reversed. Germany was losing the U-boat war not because their tactics were wrong or their submarines were inferior. They were losing because American industrial production had made it impossible to sink ships faster than they were built, and the ships being built were too tough to sink economically. In December 1944, Dönitz wrote in his diary, "We are expending our entire submarine force against an enemy who replaces losses faster than we inflict them. Each U-boat we commit represents 18 months of construction and training. Each torpedo represents scarce resources we can no longer spare. We are trading irreplaceable assets for replaceable targets. The equation is unsustainable." The final accounting told the story. Germany sank 2,603 Allied merchant ships during the entire war. America built 5,777 merchant ships, including 2,710 Liberty ships during the same period. Germany sunk less than half of what America built, and every ship Germany sank required multiple torpedoes, multiple attacks, multiple submarines that could have been used elsewhere. The Liberty ships did more than carry cargo. They broke the back of the U-boat fleet by making it mathematically impossible for Germany to win the tonnage war. You cannot sink 3 ships when your enemy builds 5. You cannot expend 4 torpedoes per target when you only have 14 torpedoes per patrol. You cannot sustain a campaign when the enemy outnumbers and outproduces you 10-1. The workers at Richmond shipyards never fought a battle. They never saw a U-boat. They never heard a torpedo. But they won the war as surely as any soldier who stormed a beach or any pilot who shot down an enemy plane. They won it by showing up every day and doing their jobs, by welding seams that held, by building ships that survived, by proving that ordinary people, given a chance and proper training, could do extraordinary things. Augusta Clausen died in 1981 at age 87. Her obituary mentioned that she had been a librarian for 40 years. It did not mention that she had built ships during the war. But at her funeral, a man showed up who nobody in the family knew. He was in his 60s, graying, walking with a cane. He introduced himself as Samuel Porter. He said he had sailed on the SS John W. Brown during the war, the ship that carried Augusta's weld, the one she made lying on her back in a space too small to move. He said the Brown had been torpedoed in 1944. The torpedo hit 20 feet from the bow section Augusta had welded. The weld held. The ship survived. 42 men made it home because of that weld. He looked at Augusta's children. Your mother never knew she saved my life. I only found out which shipyard built the Brown after the war. I have been trying to thank the people who built her ever since. I am sorry I am 36 years late. But I wanted you to know, your mother was a hero, and she brought me home. That was the legacy of the Liberty ships and the workers who built them. Not glory, not fame, not recognition. Just the quiet knowledge that they had done their jobs, and somewhere out there, men came home because of it. In the end, that was enough. That was everything.